everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to our second speaker slot. Hope you're having a good day. I'm really pleased. Well, I'm amazed, always amazed to see so many people come to hear me talk, if only for a brief introduction. But as always, Professor Andrew Lotery is a great supporter of this event, and we really appreciate him coming along and giving up his valuable time. So he's here today to talk for about 30 minutes. He's going to be giving you an update on his research, which I'm sure you will find interesting. So he's got about 20 to 30 minutes of presentation, and then he will take some questions. We do need to be done by 2:15 because the next speaker's on. And I think the other thing he's asked me to say on his behalf is he can't do personal consultations during so hold those personal thoughts. He can't do that during his actual Q&A session. Okay, let me pass over to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's always a great pleasure to be at this event. I always learn something. It's been great looking around the stands and the great work that Sight do. It's really helpful to, I know, to a lot of my patients. So I'm going to talk just an update on our research, not just my research, it's a whole team of people, as you can see in this photograph. And so, first thing I'm going to talk about is how it's 20 years of eye research at Southampton. We started 20 years ago with my appointment, and so I've got a picture on the screen here of a rather more youthful version of me when we went to, one of our first research projects was going to the Isle of Guernsey, and here I am taking a photograph of the back of the patient's eye, and there we go. And here we are organising blood samples on the ferry back from Weymouth at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I think. And then all those blood samples were converted by Helen, who's shown here, who's still with me 20 years later, and has extracted thousands of DNA samples. And then we've been able to do experiments on these samples. And interestingly, one of the families we met in Guernsey had a very strong family history of age-related macular degeneration. We didn't really know why at that stage. We since discovered through our research that they have a mutation in a gene called complement factor I. And this gene, we then figured out if we replaced a normal copy of that gene, this could be a potential treatment for dry age-related macular degeneration. And we've helped set up a company that is now doing clinical trials of replacing that gene using gene therapy, and so we're very excited about that. And it all started 20 years ago on the Isle of Guernsey, so it's just interesting how things develop. And I thought it would just be interesting to reflect. I'm going to talk about, first of all, a condition called age-related macular degeneration. It's a very common cause of visual loss. 1 in 3 people by age 75 have some signs of this, 1 in 2 by age 85. Predicted to be 280 million people affected around the world with this condition in the next few years. So it's a disease of epidemic proportions. So what did we know about this disease when we started working on it in 2002? Well, we knew it ran in families. We knew that unfortunately people went blind with it, that there were no treatments, and it was the commonest cause of blindness in the elderly in the developed world. And that was about it. That's all we really knew about it. There was very little we could do for patients, unfortunately, back then. So moving forward 20 years, what do we now know about age-related macular degeneration? Well, working with colleagues all over the world in large consortiums, we know that it's caused by over 52 different genetic changes. So in most patients with macular degeneration, we can find a genetic cause for it. We're using new techniques to study it, which I'll come on to, including artificial intelligence and computer science, which didn't exist 20 years ago. And because of the treatments that have come out of research, I'm very pleased to say that blind registrations are actually decreasing in the UK for the first time ever, and that's largely due to better treatments for macular degeneration. And even if you have a genetic risk of macular degeneration, there are simple things you can do to slow down the rate of progression, so it may not be such a big problem for you if you're diagnosed in an early stage. So you can reduce your risk of progression by simple things like not smoking, which is a huge risk factor for progression, exercise, eating a Mediterranean diet, and by that I mean not too much red processed meat, eating chicken, olive oil, fish, salads. That reduces your rate of progression of macular degeneration. And there are certain vitamins that clinical trials have shown can slow down progression, such as Vit-Eyes 2 or Ocuvite Preservision. And we know that treatments for wet macular degeneration work, particularly if they're started early, and so it's really important to get to treat people quickly. And we know that treatments for dry age-related macular degeneration are on the way. They're not there yet, but they're in late-stage clinical trials, so we're excited about that. So I'm showing a picture now of a patient Peter brought in to my clinic a few weeks ago. And Peter is a gifted artist, as you can see, if you can see this photograph, and he's showing a picture of his two hands, and he's trying to work on something, but there is this black blob in the center of his vision, this hole in his vision, and everywhere he looks, this is in the center of his vision, and this is driving him nuts. And so the question is, why has he got this? So the reason he has got this, and sorry, my videos for some reasons decided to stop working. Go back a slide, sorry. The reason he's got this problem is because blood vessels have grown up from the deep blood vessels at the back of his eye, and they're like weeds coming through cracks in the pavement, and they're forming they're causing fluid to leak into the center of the back of the eye, right where his central vision is, and without treatment that will form a scar. So happily he's come early, and what we can do for Peter, probably it's a good thing, but my video of an eye injection is not working. It worked a minute ago, but it's not, but that's probably a good thing. But what we can do is we can inject a drug into Peter's eye that will make those unhealthy blood vessels go away, and that then will get that black patch to go away and stabilize and hopefully improve his vision. And so we do a lot of research to come up with more effective treatments. The initial form of this treatment required eye injections every month, which isn't very pleasant for people to have. And so I'm showing a picture of the research team here and myself holding a certificate that we got for Research Team of the Year or something. But what we do is we try to come up with better treatments. And so we've just contributed to a worldwide study recently developing a new form of these injections, which extends the interval between eye injections so that about 80% of patients only need an injection in their eye every 12 or 16 weeks, which is much better than an injection every 4 weeks. Some of my patients have had over 100 injections in their eye. For some reason they keep coming back for more, so it can't be too bad, but it would be much nicer if you could reduce that interval between injections, and that's what our latest clinical trial has been able to do. But we'd like to go further, and so we'd like it that it would be one operation on your eye, and then you would be done. You know, one treatment and you're done for wet macular degeneration. So we're also doing work in the lab using a technology called gene therapy to give a continuous production of a protein to stop these unhealthy blood vessels growing. And what I'm showing here in the slide is where we've created a model of wet macular degeneration with a laser, and we have 4 areas where we've created wet macular degeneration. and then by applying a single gene therapy, we can switch off this blood vessel growth. So we're excited that this might be an approach that could be applied to patients and require just one treatment. And we're actually just about to start 2 different clinical trials of this similar approach in patients. So it is moving quite quickly from the lab to the clinic. So we're developing gene therapy for wet macular degeneration in the lab. We're also performing clinical trials of new treatments for dry age-related macular degeneration. And I'm showing a photograph here of a patient who's volunteered for one of our trials, the Pinnacle study, which is looking at predicting who progresses, what drives progression from early to late stages of macular degeneration. And to do this, we needed to have this special camera to take photographs of the back of people's eyes. And this camera was paid for by the gift of sight. This camera cost £200,000, so it's not money we have in our back pocket, and it was very helpful to have that. However, we were then able to put together a grant proposal to the Wellcome Trust, who then gave us £4 million and to run this study across multiple countries. So that was a 20-fold return on our investment, which is pretty good. And I think that's really a part of the strategy of Gift Sight to give investments to get bigger results, and it's been really, really helpful to our research. And we've also we take images of the back of people's eyes, and Andrew's been up to clinic, I'm sure we'll have these retinal scans, and they show us in great detail the structure of the back of the eye, and each image has 1 million pieces of information in it. And we're, in this project that the Wellcome Trust has funded us, we're looking at over 500,000 different patient images. And at 500,000 images times 1 million pieces of information per image, that's too much for any human to look at. So we're using computers and computer science and machine learning to really analyze these scans and finding new predictors of progression, a new understanding of what is the fundamental problem that causes macular degeneration. For example, we're figuring out which layer of the eye at the back of the eye degenerates first, and that's really important to understand and come up with new ideas for treatment. So, believe it or not, there are websites that rank how well your research is received, and I've just our group of just this website Expertscape says that we're in the top 0.01% of authors publishing on macular degeneration around the world over the last 10 years. So I just put that up to make the point our research is valued by the scientific community and is making an impact, and other scientists can learn from the advances that we have made. So the future for Peter for AMD, I think, is that wet AMD treatments very soon will be available that last 6 months or even a year, and perhaps even indefinitely once gene therapy gets going. Treatments for dry AMD are in late stage clinical trials, and I think we will have in the next few years treatments to stop dry AMD progressing. And we're going to be moving to more personalised medicine with earlier diagnosis based on genetic background and computer analysis of retinal images based on the research that we're doing at the moment. And ultimately this will lead to better outcomes for patients. As I say, blind registrations are already coming down, and we'd hope with this work they would come down further. So that's the first part of my talk, and now the second part is about talking about what we can do for people with inherited retinal diseases, conditions like retinitis pigmentosa. And so in the lab we're using a technology that only has existed for less than a decade called stem cell derived retinal organoids. And what I'm showing you here, and this is still astounds me, you can culture cells in the eye so they form a optic, a retina, and they form an optic cup, exactly the way it happens in a baby when the eye is developing in utero. So retinitis pigmentosa is a condition where the rod cells in the periphery of the eye deteriorate first, and so you lose your peripheral sight, you lose your night vision, and slowly you reduce down to tunnel vision. But you have the cells in the center of your eye that are much more resistant to this disease. They're the cone cells, and they give us our sharp central vision. But unfortunately, over time, those cone cells also deteriorate, and then that reduces central vision as well. And so about between 1 in 3,000 and 1 in 4,000 people have retinitis pigmentosa. But the cone cells are not affected by the genetic mutations. The mutations affect the rod cells. So why do the cone cells die? They're sometimes called the innocent bystanders. And the answer is that the rods feed the cones to keep them alive. They supply a growth factor that allows the cones to absorb glucose. And the cones are basically starved of glucose, and that's why they die. And we know that from animal models, but it hasn't really been studied in humans before. So what we're making use of is an amazing technology called stem cells. So stem cells are the cells in embryos that make all the different tissues in the body. And what has been discovered in the last 10 years is you can take an adult cell, say a skin biopsy from your arm, and reprogram those skin cells to go back to an earlier state as a stem cell, and then encourage that stem cell to form a primitive eye, to form all the cells that you see at the back of the eye. So you're taking a cell that's grown into adulthood, and differentiated into, say, a little piece of skin, and you can reverse that process back to an embryonic state, and then redirect it to form a different tissue, such as an eye. So this, much as we love our patients, we can't really biopsy their eyes to study the back of their eyes. That's not ethically acceptable to go and take tissue from the retina of patients, which would, if you're a dermatologist, you could take a skin biopsy if you're studying skin disease. We can't do that for eye diseases, but what we can do is take a skin cell and convert it to eye tissue so that we can study, and then we can study retinal tissue in the lab. And that gets around the problem of not being able to access this tissue from patients. So we have created a human retina in a dish, and I'm showing you a picture of that, which has all the different cells that are in the back of the human eye. And with that, we can then start to model what goes wrong in retinitis pigmentosa. And there's another amazing technique called gene editing, where we can go in and snip out part of our a little tiny fragment of DNA from these cells, so that we remove the growth factor that keeps cones alive from rods, and then we can have cells that have the growth factor and cells that don't. And when we do that, we see that the cone cells degenerate just like they do in the back of patients' eyes with retinitis pigmentosa. So we have a model now in a dish in the lab of retinitis pigmentosa and cones being affected, starving because they can't get glucose inside their cells. So that allows us then to do experiments. And another feature of this, we can actually label these cones fluorescently so that we can track what they're doing. we've also discovered that cones don't stay in one place. They move from the top of the retina to the back of the retina, back up to the top again during development, and that's really important as well if you're trying to put cones back into the eye, which might be another approach called stem cell therapies. And so we're understanding the biology much better because of being able to study it in a dish. So what we can do now is take these cells that are acting like they have retinitis pigmentosa, and we can give them lots of different drugs in a chemical library that has multiple different drugs, and see if we can find one that can stop cell death. And these are all, so you can purchase these these chemical libraries of drugs that are approved for human use, and this is a quick way to find a treatment to stop cone cells dying. So these experiments are underway at the moment, and if we could, if successful, then we could move on to clinical trials, which we're very well equipped to do, to test this approach in humans. But it's much quicker to do the research in the lab first, find the one drug that might be helpful, and then move to a clinical trial. So that's what we're doing, using cutting edge technologies, growing retinas in a dish, editing the DNA, so that we create these models. So again, none of this work would be possible without the Gift of Sight charity, and I've just put up a slide with highlighting all the equipment that the Gift of Sight Appeal provided to fund this work. It also funded some PhD students who are working on this, who are shown in the photograph here, and it also initially funded the stem cell scientist working on this project, Dr. Jorn Lukowski. His funding has now been taken up by the University of Southampton. But again, without the kickstart of Gift of Sight, none of this would have been possible. So just to summarise, we're using a wide variety of techniques to develop better treatments for a range of eye conditions. And we're studying disease at a very basic level in the lab with both stem cells and genetics. And we're using incredible amounts of clinical data and the latest artificial intelligence science to study macular degeneration. We're doing clinical trials to confirm that results patients get the right treatment. And that's really our bench to bedside approach. And as I say, Gift of Sight is essential to all of this. So that's a very whistle-top, very quick run through 20 years of research showing progress in age-related macular degeneration and in basic science. I hope that's been of interest, and I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. My question is, what is the difference between dry and wet? I don't quite follow that.
Sorry, I should have explained that more. So wet macular degeneration is new blood vessels, unhealthy new blood vessels growing at the back of the eye. Dry macular degeneration is essentially the cells wearing away at the back of the eye, so there's loss of the cells that sense light. Wet macular degeneration is a scar forming at the back of the eye, but we have drugs that can stop that scar formation, but they have to be given on a regular basis.
I am 91. Is there any possibility of my eyesight ever getting better?
I think there is. It's, as I say, I can't give very personal consultations because I don't know back of your eyes, but there's lots. As I was trying to illustrate, there is progress being made. I would like it to be quicker, and there's also organisations like OpenSight can help with the practicalities of low vision as well. With I've seen some tremendous low vision devices at this meeting that can help on a quicker basis than perhaps some of the clinical trials. So there's and also there may be other things such as development of cataracts that can be treated as well in patients who have macular degeneration, and that can give more sight. I think another thing I should have said, I think is really important, is that in the vast majority of people, you do not go completely blind with age-related macular degeneration. You should always have peripheral sight, and that can sometimes be used more effectively with low vision devices. It's not to say it's not a very tough problem, but there are potentially things can be done. If you haven't been seen in an eye department in the last few years, it's probably worth being checked out.
With the developments that you're doing for the wet macular degeneration, will it just be to prevent further development, or is there any hope of reversing anyone who's already got it?
So the point you come to hospital at the moment, the vision that you have, there's about a 90% chance you can keep that vision. So if you come earlier, you're going to more likely to keep good vision. You know, if you notice disturbance in your sight, there's about a 30% chance of improving vision in people with wet macular degeneration. Again, it depends at what stage they come. And what we see in most patients is an initial improvement in vision, and then over 4 or 5 years, it tends to go back to the vision they presented with. And part of that is, I think, well, part of it's progression of the dry part of the disease, but part of it's also fatigue from having to have all these injections. So if we can make that easier and maintain, we'll probably be able to maintain more people at a higher level of vision. Interestingly, surveys have been done all around Europe. We come out top, and in terms of being able to maintain vision, and part of that's there's no barriers to treatment once you get started in the same. Whereas if you go to Germany, you have to apply to your insurance company after the first 3 injections, and that causes delays, and then you get worse treatment because of delays. So it's really a question of getting treatment on time, and then you get the best results. I always tell patients it's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, you just have to keep coming back, and if you do that, we get good results.
Thank you. After you've had a certain number of injections, does your front of your eyes hit the lens? Does that get damaged?
So there's always a slight risk of every time you have an operation in the eye, but in most people not. So there's, it rarely happens. If the needle touched the lens, you could develop a cataract. It's extremely rare, but if it does happen, it can usually be corrected with cataract surgery. So it's not usually a big problem.
And a question here.
You're saying that you can build a retina in a petri dish.
Yeah.
How close are you to actually putting a retina into somebody's eye?
We're still some way off. We can use it to model diseases, and I think that's a quicker way to get to treatments. The challenge of putting it into someone's eye is making that the cells connect to the brain, and that's a huge challenge and not been achieved yet. So I think sometimes stem cell treatments are overhyped in the media, and I don't want to overhype it again. I think, but I do think it gives us an entry point to understand diseases much better, and we're starting to see treatments emerge from the sort of experiments I talked about. Yeah. So I think there's a question here at the front. Ladies had a hand up for a bit.
A couple more questions, I think.
Thank you. Can you hear all right?
Yes.
Yes. I wanted to ask about the Vitize,
Yes.
which you recommend.
Yeah.
That contains luteins, which I've been having a discussion with some of us. I'm not sure if it just helps dry macular eye disease or whether it helps both wet and dry. Could you clarify that, please?
Sure.
And also, this Vitae stuff contains zinc,
Yeah.
which is helpful for night blindness, and also vitamin C
Yeah.
and vitamin E, and copper is put in because if you take zinc for a long time, it can make you anemic.
Yeah.
And of course, zinc. I just want to cover everything.
Yes.
Zinc.
No. I'm very impressed with your knowledge of Vitae.
Zinc can give you indigestion, so some people
Yeah.
can't take the Viti's, but they do a zinc-free formula.
Yeah.
But could you please clarify about these
Sure.
vitamin type
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
please?
So clinical trials have shown that taking these types of vitamins reduce your risk of progression from the early stages to more advanced stages by about 25%. So if you have wet macular degeneration, you're not going to help the wet macular degeneration. But what can happen, what a lot of people don't appreciate is that as well as wet macular degeneration, you've also probably got dry macular degeneration underneath, progressing as well. So even if once you've cured wet macular degeneration with injections, you can still then switch back to dry macular degeneration. So it's probably, unless your vision is very severely reduced, it's probably worth taking them both for dry and wet. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything in the pipeline for Stargardt's disease?
Yes. So we're just in the process of finishing a clinical trial of Stargardt's disease.
I don't understand what that is.
So Stargardt's disease is it's the commonest form of juvenile macular degeneration. It's an inherited eye disease, and it's similar to age-related macular degeneration, but affects younger people. Affects about 1 in 10,000 people. And so the problem with Stargardt's disease is essentially you can't process vitamin A correctly, and toxic waste products build up at the back of the eye. So there are several clinical trials looking at this. One early, what's called phase 1 study, has shown a reduction in progression of Stargardt's disease by giving patients a modified version of vitamin A that avoids the build-up of the toxic byproducts. So that's moving on to later stage clinical trials to see if it really is a useful treatment. But it's been about 6 months ago fast-tracked for progression to late-stage trials by the FDA in the States. So it's the first treatment that's actually shown a potential benefit. So that's underway. We've done a study, a European-wide study. We don't know the results yet. It's still following up patients with a slightly different oral treatment. So both of these are tablet treatments. And there are several groups looking at trying to replace the gene that's faulty in Stargardt's disease with gene therapy. But there's no results yet. But we have one study that's in a human clinical trial has shown a little bit of benefit. So I think there are things coming.
Andrew, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing the update on the research. A round of applause, please, for Andrew. Thank you very much, Andrew.